Got Mia O'Brien on the line here again. Jacksonville Sports Radio Network, 92.5 FM down in Jayville, the home of the Jaguars and a home of the Florida Gators and all things Florida Gators. Mia, good morning. Welcome to San Francisco, the West Coast here in the Bay Area. Obviously, we're bringing you on, Joe Shaxky, the Butcher, and Bonte Hill here. We're bringing you on because we're following up on a tweet you had yesterday, and there's a lot of smoke around this player, Brandon Aiyuk. Now, we all love Brandon Aiyuk. He had a monster season, number 2 in yards per catch, 36 in targets, yet he was 7th in the league in receiving yards here. But you tweeted that there's mutual interest between Brandon Aiyuk and Jacksonville. So I guess let's just start there. I guess you can't reveal where your sources are, but why is there interest between Aiyuk and the Jaguars out of all teams?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of connect the dots, and I can kind of, for as much information and transparency as he can give you guys, I will, because, again, this is still very early in this process from what I've been told, but let's start connecting some dots. So yesterday, I was leaving wonderful TPC Sawgrass. The Players' Championship, of course, is this week here in Ponte Vedra Beach. Was headed to the Jaguars free agency press conference, received a call from someone within the Jaguars organization that, among other things, there were calls being placed and there was mutual interest between Brandon Aiyuk's camp and the Jacksonville Jaguars. One of those things that I get a lot of that during the week, and so I kind of just store those nuggets away. I then arrived at the stadium and saw, which I'm sure you guys have been following this account too, and if you have not, I'm sure you and your listeners will after this, that Pretty Ricky Twitter account that a lot of folks believe is actually someone involved with Athletes First, which of course is the agency that represents Brandon Aiyuk, that also represents Calvin Ridley. Let's table that for here in just a second as we continue to connect the dots. And so when I saw this Pretty Ricky account also tweet out about potential interest between Aiyuk and the Jacksonville Jaguars, I made a few more calls, and it was confirmed to me that Trent Baalke is indeed, after losing out on the Calvin Ridley sweepstakes and the rights to retain him here in Jacksonville, have been placing some calls about a potential replacement, adding another wide receiver to this wide receiver room. And so when you connect the dots, I mean, it isn't that hard to see. Calvin Ridley's representation is the same representation as Brandon Aiyuk. Even if it's a large, massive entity, you can't help but say, hey, there seems to be an indicator that in those negotiations that fell apart because ultimately Ridley signed with Tennessee, could there have been also, we may be shopping Brandon at some point or may be interested in finding a new home for him. Would there be interest? To which the Jaguars reciprocated it and said, yes, there would be interest on our part of it. Now, what would a deal look like? Is it actually happening? Again, way too early, although these things do happen rather quickly. I don't expect it gaining a ton of legs just because obviously Trent Baalke was a bit tied up yesterday with the Eric Armstead deal, needless to say. But I do think it's a situation worth monitoring because at the very least it suggests that, number one, Brandon Aiyuk's representation, if only to raise his leverage and raise his asking price for an eventual second contract, is shopping him around the league. And secondly, because the Jacksonville Jaguars are pushing all their chips to the middle of the table and could be looking to add that number one wide receiver that they thought they had in Calvin Ridley, but now perhaps don't have in the building.
Wow. You are a phenomenal reporter because you are giving us nothing but fact after fact after fact. So not knowing the framework of this, how aggressive is Jacksonville looking at this wide receiver market? Obviously, you referenced losing Calvin Ridley. Do you think they would be willing to give up a current first-round pick, or you don't even know where the package would start with?
I would think the asking price, again, and this is from what I have been told, this is from Aiyuk's camp. So I don't think this is to say at all. Let's get that out there. This is not to say the San Francisco 49ers are shopping Brandon Aiyuk. Mm-hmm. I think, in my opinion, I just think this is his representation, seeing what interest may be and seeing what an asking price and what an eventual contract might look like from a team. That's solely what I believe this is for. I believe if the 49ers were to be told that Aiyuk wanted a trade, they would look for nothing more than a first. I don't believe the Jaguars would part with their first-round pick. We've been workshopping some ideas here in Jacksonville about what compensation may look like, knowing he obviously is going into a contract year. Anywhere between a second this year, a third next year is something I know we've just talked about just as a radio station about what a deal could possibly look like, because as much as it's great to say, well, we still need wide receivers for Trevor Lawrence, you also still needed help on the interior of the defensive line. You still have an aging offensive line, and so there's still other holes you need to address with that 17th overall pick that I don't think can just be dismissed because you're getting a bona fide number one wide receiver entering the prime of his career. And so that's where I don't see a world in which the Jags would part with that first-round pick. But I do think that, actually, in a weird twist of fate, signing Eric Armstead yesterday does free up a big need for the Jaguars that I thought they would address at 17th overall along the interior of that defensive line.
Wow, Mio O'Brien just on absolute fire here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 The Game. Armstead, real quick on Armstead before we pivot back to the wide receiver room. Armstead, do we know the details of his contract yet? We saw 3 years, $51 million. We know he didn't want to restructure here in San Francisco, and we're surprised he went all the way out east when he's from about an hour away from San Francisco. What is the guaranteed money when it comes to Armstead, or has that been revealed yet?
Yeah, we haven't seen the official numbers on that guaranteed amount just yet, but what I do know is obviously $50 million guaranteed to Calvin Ridley from the Tennessee Titans was not a number that the Jaguars are willing to meet in terms of a 30-year-old or soon-to-be 30-year-old wide receiver. I doubt that we would see a world that they gave $50 million guaranteed, or even like 30 or 20 million guaranteed, or 30 or 40, million guaranteed to Armstead, as he's already 30 years old. It's
right.
A different position to be certain, but at the same time, I am very curious to see what that exact amount is. The Jaguars last offseason, for context, a little bit, I don't want to use the word skittish, but maybe a little bit hesitant to give out the guaranteed money that many people thought Shad Khan, the owner of the Jags, would just be signing checks left and right, most notably Arden Key, who coincidentally also left the Jaguars for the Titans, a name that you guys are familiar with in the Bay Area. I think Arden thought that he would be handed a blank check up front. That was not the case in terms of guaranteed money the Jaguars offered versus what the Titans offered. And so I am genuinely intrigued to see what that number will be. But all we know as of now is it's estimated to be about $17 million a year for a 3-year contract.
Do you think, Mia, they would be willing to give Brandon Aiyuk $50 million guaranteed, knowing he's only 25 years old, if the Jaguars did trade for the 49ers wide receiver?
Yeah, and that's actually something I was just talking with one of my colleagues here at the course about, because the truth of the matter is, again, for context sake, for everybody in the Bay Area, Calvin Ridley is 29 years old. He's soon to be 30 years old. His football shelf life is different than a lot of folks because he didn't leave high school until he was 19 years old, I believe. He didn't leave college until he was 22 years old. He obviously missed a year and a half due to the suspension and the medical leave of absence when he was with the Falcons. And so you could make the argument that his quote-unquote football life, he's really about 26 years old. And so if the Jags weren't willing to give him $50 million, would they be willing to give it to Brandon Aiyuk? I tend to believe that if in that 1 year, let's say the Jags were to somehow make a deal, and again, for all intents and purposes, this is a very much exploratory stages of a potential trade, but if they were to make a deal, I would be very curious if they had to agree to that extension before the trade was made, or if he would play on the 5th-year option, and then they would come up with the dollars and cents. I think just because the Jaguars have gambled on a Christian Kirk before, and they've seen amazing returns, but then last year with the Ridley deal, you eventually give up a 3rd and a 5th-round pick, but for what proved to be a 1-year rental. And so I'm curious if there would be a buyer beware of we need to see it in our building before we give that money. I would think Aiyuk, though, would command something in that $50 million guaranteed range if he's to continue the success he had on the field this past offseason.
Okay, one last you're giving us great info. One last one here. Trevor Lawrence, we got an up-close look at him in the one game that the Niners played. He looked like he was getting overwhelmed. Obviously had that great comeback in the playoff game a couple years ago. What's going on with the 5th-year option? What's going on with the extension? Because we're talking a lot about Brock Purdy, and there's a case to be made that Brock Purdy's done more in the NFL than Trevor Lawrence. What's the reluctancy from the Jaguars, or is there a number that they're all looking to negotiate on? I'm just curious where that contract extension looms.
Yeah, I actually did a little bit of intel on this yesterday. The number is still very much up in the air. I think that Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars, both parties would tell you they did not have the season they wanted to a year ago. And in many regards, Trevor is going to bet on himself this upcoming season. I believe the 5th-year option will be picked up. That's a non-issue. But I do think his hope is that if he was to play well this upcoming year, that would raise the price of the dollar for he and his camp. Now, with that said, I also heard plenty of rumblings that the Jags would love to get a deal done before the season begins with Trevor Lawrence in, let's say, August. And then even if he does go out and performs above expectations, then they would already have him locked in and they wouldn't be facing the issue they are with their star pass rusher and Josh Allen, who they opted to not sign, have him play on that 5th-year option in a contract year. And, of course, he has a career year at 17.5 sacks and now is looking for primo top pass rusher money market. And so personally, I am genuinely intrigued if they come to a consensus. I think they will before the season begins. Will that result in a discount for the Jaguars remains to be seen. I do know that Trevor has said to them that, akin to Tom Brady, he is willing to take less if that means the team around him is built in his image.
You know, it was me, O'Brien's here on the Morning Rush on 95.7 The Game, Jacksonville Sports Radio Network, 92.5 FM in Jacksonville. She's at the Players right now. I know Shasky wants to get some questions on the Players. It sounds beautiful out there. It looks beautiful. Looks like you're having a great time.
They're missing half the field because they're in live. I mean, it's driving me nuts.
No doubt about that. But Mia, real quick on the recent, because we were arguing about Christian Kirk and whether or not that's Trevor Lawrence's number one option, or Evan Ingram, if that's enough for Trevor Lawrence as 1A and 1B type wide receivers. You think Aiyuk, if he was to get traded to Jacksonville, he'd be the bona fide number one wide receiver in Jacksonville over Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram?
Yes, I believe he would be. Wow. At least on the pace that he was a year ago. I believe, though, that the Jaguars brought Calvin Ridley in thinking he would be their number one. And as we saw in the 6 games that Christian Kirk missed after that core muscle injury against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football, you could make the argument that Christian Kirk was the number one overall. And how funny is that, boys? Because you look back, I was here at the Players 2 years ago when that mega deal was announced for Christian Kirk, and people thought Trent Baalke was nuts. How could you sign a guy who's just a slot receiver to that sort of money? Well, he's entering year 3 of that 4-year deal. And there's a lot of people looking around saying, man, we probably need to extend him because he's one of Trevor's best friends, and he's clearly the security valve. We know that Evan Ingram signed that 3-year deal last offseason, so that means that he's only got 2 more years left, too. And so that's where, even if it's not Brandon Aiyuk, from the Jacksonville Jaguars perspective, I do think Trent Baalke is recognizing the need to find that next young wide receiver that can also grow with Trevor Lawrence.
Mia, you are excellent. I mean, we're going to have you on whenever there's anything South Florida related like that. Excellent. Thank you.
Central Florida, right? Central Florida.
Yeah, I always go Miami.
Northeast.
Are you more of a Gator or no?
Oh, please, neither. I actually am from New Jersey, and I had my first job. I had my first job in the great state of Iowa. I don't feel bad saying that either because I work with far too many Gators and Noles, and there's something else down here. I enjoy covering both teams. Have tremendous respect for both, but I actually am regarded down here as like the Iowa insider. So please keep my good friend George Kittle safe up there.
Oh, I like that.
We want to get him more targets in the Super Bowl. Can you somehow figure out a way for Shanahan and Purdy to get him the ball more in the Super Bowl?
Oh man! I don't know if I have that much power.
Mia, we have a long-standing relationship with Trent Baalke. Tell Trent we said hi in the Bay Area.
Hey boys, trust the board. It's all about the value.
I love that.
Remember when Trent's daughter was out here tweeting?
I do remember
10
that.
years ago?
I do remember that.
Mia, you're great.
That was awesome. Thanks so much. Short notice.
Yeah,
I know it was short notice, Mia. Thanks so much for the time today.
Hey, appreciate you guys, and we have tremendous respect for you guys. I also oversee our multimedia operation, and you guys are one of our bookmarked outlets that we always look at when we're trying to
Now I got to ask. Hold on, Mia. This is the first time we've ever talked.
We're out of our minds.
From afar. Are you like, these guys are psychos? How do they get a job in Morning Drive?
From afar.
Hey, listen, you could thank Barrett Sports Media. He pointed me in y'all's direction.
Somewhere Guru's like, yeah.
Mia, thanks so much.
Thanks, Mia.
Have fun out there.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Sharp as a tack.
That was
a meat sandwich of information. I wrote